What's up, guys, and welcome back to another edition of Competitive Edge Podcast. So today, I am super excited because not only do we get to bring somebody that's an expert and someone that's training on leadership and team building, is going to talk about some of the adversity they've overcome that's actually become a strength for them. But I believe that for all of us out there, if you're in sales, leadership, where you're an entrepreneur, intrapreneur, building teams, having the right people around you, just like I learned in sports, this is the key ingredient for many of us to be able to go to that next level and to get there. But I'm also really excited because Bryce is in the fitness side of things. So I'm sure we're going to talk about some health and fitness and what he has done there. But Bryce Henson, he's got the CEO podcast. He's actually scaled one of the largest franchises across the country, the boot camp that you guys might have heard of, Fit Body Boot Camp, maybe in your city, maybe around you. We were talking about all the markets that he's in now. You've probably seen some of Bryce's work. He's worked with some amazing people from Bedro. I saw him out with Andy Elliott recently, and he's all over the place, not only training, but equipping people to perform and compete at their best. And so I'm excited about this conversation. You're going to take a pen and paper and take some notes because we're going to jump into a lot of those topics and I'm sure even more. So Bryce, welcome to the show.
Brian, my friend, great to see you and just fired up to reconnect in the new year ahead of us. So thanks for having me on.
We get to flip spots, right? So I was on your show and thank you for that. And great conversation. I got to know you better and I realized all these mutual friends that we had, and I've been watching what you've been doing. And I was excited for this conversation as we kick off 2025. The statistics that people share out there now of how many people have fallen off their goals, fallen off maybe the New Year's resolutions and all that. And I'd love to start there because you see it more than anything in leadership and in fitness. Why do you think people are falling off so early in the year? Like what did we get wrong if we're off track?
Love that. And yeah, we're third week in January, we're recording this, and by national data, we're already past the time where a vast majority of New Year's resolutions have already been went by the wayside. I think, Brian, when I look at this, I look at leadership, not only building teams and organizations, but there's two levels of leadership for my leadership framework. It's lead yourself and then lead others. And it first starts leading with you. And I think the two distinct qualities of strong leaders, I call it the 2 Ds of leadership. They have direction and they have discipline. And direction is super important. You know, I was talking to Bedros, as you mentioned, my business partner, founder of Fit Body Boot Camp, who I'm the CEO, and I've worked with for 12 years. And we had a conversation maybe a few months ago, and he said, to me, Bryce, leadership, I read this a while back and it just makes a lot of sense. People are attracted to a leader that knows where they're going, they have direction, they're comfortable in their own skin, they're authentically themselves. Okay, that's extremely important to leadership. And they have fun in the process. And I think that's really important for any person from a self-leadership perspective to have direction. So I wanted to illustrate that. The second point, though, Brian, comes down to discipline. And we all know that discipline is super and critical to, whether winning at sports or whether winning at business or life for that matter. But where does discipline come from? And a friend of mine that I enlisted last year, his name's Ben Newman. He's my mindset coach. He talks about this concept, the burn. And the burn is looking back at your trauma, the challenges you went through in life. And for me, when I was having this conversation, and that principle really stuck with me, my burn is breaking the cycle of alcoholism in my life so I can lead a better legacy. And for me, I'm a recovering alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. And, it's a genetic disposition, the biochemistry, if you will, rampant in my, DNA. And for me, I've really attached myself to the burn, which is wanting to break that cycle. And I'm happy to report, December of 2016 was the last time I drank alcohol, but that's the foundation for me, right? Wanting to break that cycle, that generational cycle, burn, that frustration comes from, but really I attach that to my purpose. And, if you're listening to this right now and you're having a hard time, with discipline, whether hitting that goals, hitting that New Year's resolution, I would challenge you to take a step back and look at what that burn is. What adversity have you gone through? What's the big trauma that you want to run away from? And to kind of put a bow on this, Tony Robbins says that people move for one of two ways, either towards pleasure or away from pain. And both are actually accurate. So the burn is moving moving away from pain. Identify your pain. That's where really discipline comes. And then once you do that, then you can gravitate towards your purpose, which, is your mission, your calling, if you will. So I think people have a little bit of lack of clarity on that, and hopefully, providing insight will really help you, if you're listening, to develop more discipline, and that way you can stay true to whatever goal you put in place, not just a New Year's resolution.
Yeah, I love how you broke that down, and I know we have mutual friend there with Ben, and I share a lot of his stuff with our audience, so they can learn, and always introducing them to great people. And one of the things that stuck out about your story, Bryce, and you alluded to it, so let's just jump into it, is what you overcame even as a teenager and having issues, and then having alcohol and substance abuse and things that you had to then deal with and really combat. And I think a lot of times people look at those stories, whatever they might have been, maybe it wasn't substance abuse, maybe it was some other type of issue in your life. They don't look at that the way you do. And you've really reframed this and making it an advantage for you. And I always talk about competitive edge, but you talk about that being adversity can be your advantage. How can people turn that story, or maybe, like you said, running from pain or towards pleasure, all these things, like making a change? How can people start to leverage maybe the truth of that story and then now move forward?
Yeah, great question. I'll give you the simple answer. The framework is to endure whatever challenge or adversity you're going through, then reflect on that challenge. You got to process it. Okay, what was the good, the bad, and the ugly? In any situation, there's a good and there's a bad side to it. Even the worst particular situations, there's always a silver lining. Asian culture knows this with the yin and the yang. And then after you're able to reflect and process, then you need to reframe that. What is the learning lesson from there? And then use that to your advantage. And I shared the story, at least the high level. I'll give you a little bit more granular insight. The planet were very volatile. They weren't all bad. There was many good parts about that, but they were volatile because my father was addicted to drugs, gambling, and alcohol. And as I alluded, alcoholism is very rampant in my family. So because of that, it was very volatile. But thankfully, by the grace of God, my mom got us out of that situation and whatnot, but got us into a better situation, at least from a stable situation. My mom was, a single parent raising 3 kids on her own. So, for the following 10 years of my life, it was challenging for first world standards. We used to run out of money before we used to run out of month. But thankfully that developed a lot of grit in my life. But because I got removed from that situation from my father back when I was 10 years old, it was a solid 10 years before I started drinking alcohol. And I kind of, it wasn't in the lion's fire of that. So I didn't see the ramifications, or at least they weren't top of my memory. And by the way, I don't think my father was a bad guy. I think, unfortunately, he just didn't have the mental fortitude and courage to face his adversity and turn it to his advantage, just to kind of set the record straight. In any case, as I started drinking alcohol, just as most, young people do in college and all that, even though I didn't drink frequently, and especially as my 20s and early 30s came on, I would drink less frequently, but more aggressively, if you will. And it culminated with a working situation, someone that I love to the core, and seeing her in a really challenging situation. Also, alcohol infected her life, and a lot of challenges, both personal, familial, relationship, legal issues came at play. And I finally had a sit-down situation with her after it culminated in a really bad situation with alcohol. And I turned to her and I said, I love you dearly, but if we're going to work together long term, something has to change. And forever is a long time, but for the next 12 months, if you want to work together, that you need to remove alcohol from your life. And it was a heavy conversation, you would imagine, Brian. And I'm exhausted from just that whole experience and having to have that conversation with a dear loved one. And I went to bed and I woke up and I looked at the mirror, and I took a deep, dark look at the mirror, and Brian, something had changed in me. And what I realized in that time, that I'd become one of the people that I hated the most, which is a hypocrite. Here I was, maybe I didn't have the challenges, or I definitely had the challenges, but not the ramifications, the legal issues that came with it. But here I was, knowing that it was a good path to remove alcohol from her life, but also for my life. And I did not do that up until that point. And for me, that was the burn, that was the challenge, that was the trauma. And going through that, I realized, I was like, when is this insanity going to end? And for me, I took that and I reframed reframed that. I processed it, ultimately reframed it, and I turned it to my advantage. So now it's my battling cry, and I've taken the addictive behavior, the biochemistry, and instead of pouring drugs and alcohol, I've changed that to fitness and to leadership and to personal growth to be a better person. So if you're listening to this, what challenge and pain and trauma you've gone through that actually can be a blessing if you take a step back, if you embrace it, if you endure it, if you reflect on that, you process it, and then ultimately you reframe that to the positive on how that can benefit your life. And that's the story, my story. It's been my superpower, and I know it can be for your audience as well.
Hey guys, it's Brian here. I hope you are enjoying the show. By the way, if you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur looking to grow your personal brand, make a bigger impact, maybe increase your leads and grow your revenue, let's help you get started today by connecting up with my friends over at the Brand Builders Group. You've heard me talk about them, but if you're new here, this is definitely the first step to get you started in turning your reputation into revenue. Head over to freebrandcall.com/Brian Covey. Again, to set up your free brand call, go to freebrandcall.com/Brian Covey to set up a free strategy call with one of the team at Brand Builders, and they will dive into your specific goals for how you want to grow your personal brand. I can't wait to hear how it goes. I love the framework, man, because I think back to that, and most of the successful people I know have overcome something in their life that we would call adversity and what's there. And then they have channeled that energy, as you talk about, like you started moving it towards fitness and leadership and started to improve yourself. I'd love to know some of that journey, because I think some people are out there and they're like, okay, I want to make these changes, and maybe I've even decided to, and I'm heading down this path. And, it's almost like that nervous energy, right, Bryce, where you're like, man, I know I need to go do something else, but what do I go do? And how do I go attack this? My belief just over time, and I'd love for you to expand on this, has been fitness is such a great anchor and foundation. Is what did you find in that journey, and how has fitness really provided that for you in that kind of getting away from the old you, building this new life?
Oh, I love that. I mean, we're kindred spirits. That's why we were following each other for a while, and just seeing your philosophy on competitiveness and your background in sports, really spoke to me, and certainly fitness as well. My framework on leadership we just talked about is lead you, lead yourself. The foundation of that is really having direction and discipline, but how you go about doing that, I think there's 3 steps that you need to take in order to be a better self-leader. Number 1, you need to seek out adversity. We just learned if adversity is your advantage, at the end of the day, adversity is coming for you, whether you like it or not. So either you're going to lean into it and it's going to be shorter adversity with backside, or you can run away from it and it's going to be less adversity in the front end and bigger adversity in the back end. So you have to make that decision. But the first step in the process is seeking adversity. The second is being curious, really not only about others, but about yourself, exploring what do I like, what I don't like, and then gravitate to the things that you really like that are passions for you. And lastly would be embracing feedback, which is really, really strong framework to develop, leadership skills or self-leadership skills. Going specifically to the point about seeking out adversity, fitness is the foundation. And we all know the value of it, but there's a lot of adversity. It's hard getting up early. It's hard lifting weights. It's hard, hitting a strong circuit session. It's a very uncomfortable. It's challenging to that process. There's a lot of adversity you have to go through, but coming out on the other side is just an absolute blessing. And for me, my journey started from the fitness perspective, back in 2007. And I shared with you my first 10 years were in the South, actually Atlanta, Georgia, where my parents met. The following 14 years were spent in the state of Michigan, where my mom lived. We stayed with my grandma, thankfully, for the better part of 10 years. And one thing that I love about the Midwest is the down-to-earth people, the salt of their people, but I think we can all agree it's not the fitness capital of the world. So, when I was 21 years young, when I got a job opportunity out in Southern California, I was excited to be here, the palm trees, the blue skies, everything that California has to offer. But I had more dark days than good for the first couple of years because I didn't have fitness in my life, Brian. And so I lived that way for a little bit. And a fortuitous situation happened. One of my best friends from college, his name's Adam. He was my first unofficial fitness mentor. And And he came out to Southern California. We ended up living together and training together for a better part of 2 years, but hyper-focused over 6 months. And what Adam did for me is he introduced me to lifting weights. He introduced me to circuit training. He introduced me to clean nutrition, but most importantly, he introduced me to coaching and accountability. And over a period of 6 months, I dropped 20 pounds of body fat. I put 20 pounds of lean muscle. And that was great, right? The physicality, the anesthetic, the look and feel of that's great. But way more important to that, it changed my life. It gave me energy. It gave me enthusiasm. It gave me mental clarity. But more importantly, it gave me confidence. Because when you do hard things, when you make a promise to yourself, when you keep that promise, it develops grit. It develops, mental fortitude. It develops self-esteem and self-confidence. So really, that's the foundation. And I know, we're kindred spirits on this. I watch you crushing your CrossFit workouts and all that. I get fired up. That's the foundation for self-leadership, and it's so important.
I love you as you're sharing that, man. And I think everybody listening out there, we've all been through these seasons, and I've had different points in my life where I was not the most fit, and I knew there was a better version of myself out there, and it was like, how do I figure it out? And I found my jam years ago, and I know we've talked about that. It's like, I love to compete. I love classes. I love the energy around people, the music going, and even today. Bryce, I was thinking about as I was prepping for our call, it's like, we had this row and assault bike, which I have this love-hate relationship with the assault bike, but it gives you feedback. Like, you don't get given a calorie or mileage on that thing. You have to work for it. And my quads are blowing up and I'm just gassed as I'm working through that. And I'm like, you know what? This is where most people quit or they pull back. And so your point, every day there's a chance to compete and find out, what am I made of? Look, and some days are great. Some days it's like, I'm just fighting to battle through it. And for people out there that are wondering, Bryce, you've got a pretty wide exposure to people going through fitness, and with your boot camp and everything you've done, what are some of the things and the key ingredients for people to stick with it, right? Over the long run, for them to stick with a program, whatever it might be, and to stay on that. Because I think some people have some goals to do that.
Well, I think, Brian, you just said it, man. It's the teamwork, it's the camaraderie, it's the group element. That really bonds people first and foremost. We are tribal in nature. So what I learned a while back, and why, I love running my company, Fit Body Bootcamp, is everyone knows the value of training. When my business partner, our founder, created the concept back in 2008, he was a one-on-one personal trainer. And that was certainly very helpful. And the other aspect of this is accountability and coaching, which we'll talk about in a second. But then when the real estate crisis happened, realizing that, hey, the people that were his clients one-on-one training couldn't necessarily afford $1,000 a month on personal training within the crisis that they were previously. So he transitioned that model to a group training model. And what he learned, and what I learned very quickly thereafter, is through group accountability, when you're with people, and there's something about our tribal nature that pushes you to do more than if you were just alone. So that teamwork, that group feeling, and that element is mission critical. The other point, which I just alluded to in terms of the one-on-one coaching perspective, it's coaching and accountability. And Brian, I know you are a very disciplined guy. I am as well. But one thing for sure, both of us, including everyone out there, we are more inclined to ourselves to break the promises to ourselves than we are to other people. So when you make an agreement, when you make a commitment to someone else and you hire on a coach or an accountability partner, you will, just human nature, our biology has a much harder time breaking that commitment. So the second aspect of really sticking with a goal long-term, in addition to creating some group accountability, is to getting a one-on-one accountability. Get a coach, get an accountability partner, because you are way more inclined to follow that through if you follow those two steps.
Dude, I love that. And I'm experiencing my own journey of, I tried working out on my own, and always, even this weekend, I was traveling, we're in St. Louis with our youngest son for soccer, and he's sitting in there riding the bike, and I'm working out by myself. And the truth is, I'm not pushing as hard as if I'm in a class, right? I'm going and I'm getting through it. But if I'm grading the two levels of intensity and workout, and even the enjoyment, let's be real, it's not the same. And so I love what you shared there. And you talked about at the end of that, the importance of a coach or mentor. And I see you doing this, right? And all the elite high performers I know, they have a coach and a mentor. How has that over the past year really accelerated your results or allowed you to do more than you could on your own? Because I'm always fascinated by this, the people that don't have coaches, but then there's some that think they have a coach and yet they're not seeing the same results. And 2-3 years later, they look no different. They feel no different. There is no change. How has that helped you having coaches and mentors in your life, even the last year?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll give you 2 examples of this, but, from a big picture perspective, number one, it holds you accountable. But then number 2, it provides you a roadmap or a game plan, because let's face it, there's a million things that we need to be good at as humans, right? Like there's so many different skill sets. So for me, what I learned at a young age, it doesn't make any sense to try to reinvent the wheel. I just need to find whatever skill set that I'm trying to acquire, find someone who's way better at that skill set than I am, and then get coached by them. They're going to give you the roadmap, they're going to give you the game plan, and they're going to hold you accountable in the process. And I'll give you an example of this past year, and I'm still a work in progress, but I've just noticed so much growth in the last 12 months, just in my ability to communicate and articulate a message, on a stage in front of people. And to give you some perspective before I, go into the particular story, I'm a soccer player like you. You played at a much higher level than I did, but my coach, my senior year, which I think was originally quoted by Vince Lombardi, said that practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Yes. And really that stuck with me. And what that means is you could be a soccer player and just get a lot of reps and sets, and you're going to get better, but I would say incrementally, until you hire a coach. You talked about this. You get feedback, you get yourself on game film, and then you get coached by an expert. They're going to be able to give you guidance and give you a feedback to get you the next level. So last year I ended up hiring a speaking coach because I had developed some speaking ability, but I want to take it to the next level. And I had hired my coach. He asked for one, presentation that I did at a conference that I spoke in June of last year in Austin, Texas. And I was excited. I crushed it. It was a lot of energy. And I sent him this tape, and literally within 5 minutes, he gave me 3 pointers that just took the wind out of my sails on one hand. But then I stopped in that moment. I was like, he's absolutely right. And I've now adjusted that in terms of my communication, my coaching, one of them. And forgive me for being crude. He's like, Bryce, you're dry humping the audience. I'm like, what the hell does dry humping the audience mean? What he meant by that, he's like, very common when speakers go out, they get up, they thank the MC, they do this, that, and the other. And I just wasted 2 minutes, where now I go, whenever I'm speaking in front of an audience, I go straight into story. It's kind of like a hook. If you're saying an email, that email has to be, I guess, attention grabbing. That's the hook to get your audience to read that email, or in this particular case, listen to my coaching or my presentation. So that was incredible feedback. It was painful, which can be painful when you're working a coach, but this is where the changes happen. The second example I'll give you, just to really drive this point home, is we're just talking about fitness. We're both fitness guys, right? Yeah. But my weakest part of my fitness is my flexibility. And it occurred to me in August of last year, I run a couple miles every morning. And that, for me, that allows me to clear my mind. It creates a lot of clarity and creativity in my mind. But like in August of last year, like my legs, my hamstrings, my glutes, they were so tight. Like literally, I remember one morning after a couple miles, I get off, I'm like hobbling like an old man. And it occurred to me, when you look at people in their 60s, 70s, even 90s, there's 2 types of people. There's flexible people and there's not flexible people. And the not flexible people, they pay a huge price in pain. They're limited, the sclerosis, all this. And I realized I'm 41 years old. You just run the tape another 10, 15, 20 years. Unless I attack this right now, it's going to be hard. But here's the problem, Brian. I'm a high performer just like you. My mind works really, fast, and I'm just like a go-getter. I like CrossFit. I like circuit training. I like, situations where I'm going to be moving. However, stretching, there's a dynamic aspect at play, but there's static stretching. You need to slow down. For me, that does not come natural. So I'm the equivalent of that person that, walks into a CrossFit or walks into a Fit Body boot camp that's super out of shape. That's me when it comes to flexibility. So what I did is this past August, I ended up hiring a flexibility coach. I started with 1 session a week, and it was actually brutal for the first 2 months. Oh, yeah. And then now I've adjusted to 2 in December. And then now I'm throwing in 1 one yoga session on Sunday. So now I'm doing, as of this month, I'm getting stretched by my stretch coach 2 times, and now I have a yoga class for that accountability. And I can't say that I'm a flexible kind of rubber band man yet. However, what I can tell you, Brian, I am out of pain. And you fast forward this year, my theme of the year, my word of the year is flexibility. So I want to be able to provide you that example, one, of a feat that I've been successful at, and one that I'm still struggling at, but that's the value of coaching. And I know, and I'm curious, actually flipping this back to you, because you've had a lot of experience with coaching in your life. Where has that shown up for you? Because that's been huge in my life.
Dude, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing the specifics of that, right? Because I know a lot of people want to speak on stages where they have teams, even they're speaking on Zoom calls in person, they're doing presentations. And I realized that a few years ago, and I hired a speaking coach as well. And it was brutal. I went in and they ripped me apart and told me all the things that, by the way, I kind of already knew. I wasn't really sure what else to do. And it was like, what do you do with your hands? What are your gestures? And to your point, like whether it's dry hump in the audience or just too many words that were filler words and all this, you get real feedback. And what I would share with everybody, Bryce, what you shared, I don't want them to miss this. The more specific the feedback and the more you allow someone to give you, just say raw feedback, right? Like the stuff that probably can hurt most people's feelings, the faster you can accelerate your growth. So I love that you shared that and then you went and implemented. And then the other one of the flexibility, like I'm still in the working on my mobility club, right? I think I have decent mobility, but then I see people with this exceptional mobility and I go, I want to be more like that. And that's the high performer in us that you shared. And so I'm on the same thing of, I've actually even prioritized that side of it over strength. Well, I'm going to continue to do strength. I'm going to continue to do my running and endurance and all that. I do think I'll be 48 this year. Is one of the things I want to make sure is how do I have that, not just in my body, but then to your point, using that for your word for the year, flexibility, is I want to be flexible in how I get the goals, how I show up as a father and a husband and all that stuff. So I don't want people to miss that because there's so many things within that you start to slow down. You attack an area, and thank goodness, I'm sure you're probably feeling this, is like, had I not attacked that area, I'm speaking in a week, and man, I know I'm better than I was a few years ago, and I know I got a lot more work to do, right? And that's the beauty of what we do. So let's shift a little bit because, look, you get to work with a lot of people in leadership, and I find this is an area, John Maxwell is one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah.
We just don't really have formal training out there. It must be really, when I got promoted up in the corporate world, it was like, hey man, you're the top producer. Let's move over and put this manager title. No idea what I'm doing. Let's start there as people that are on that journey. They want to become better leaders. What's some of the process and framework that you would advise them that they could start to develop themselves?
Yeah, great question. Before I hit that, I just wanted to really drive one point home that you just said, which is about the flexibility, but also having vision around leadership. And, Brian, I can tell, we're cut from the same cloth. I would say, and speaking for myself, I'm just not factory install a normal, flexible guy, not necessarily like in the physicality, but just normally I have a vision. I'm pretty rigid on things. So that flexibility approach can sometimes be really challenging for me. But I read a quote, or I actually heard Jeff Bezos, the great Jeff Bezos of Amazon, share this quote a few years ago. And he said that you need to be rigid with the vision, but be flexible with the details. And for me, that really opened up my eyes so I could still be that high performer, that type A, that driven guy that, hey, I need to get to this goal. This is where I need to go. But then many times you can have more flexibility and mobility in how you get to that goal, and you can weave both in together. And that's probably actually even a perfect segue to, just leadership and how to, become a better leader. The first, kind of segue into that particular question, I talked about seeking adversity from a self-leadership perspective. That is everything. The second framework that I have, if you're trying to be a better leader of self, you need to get curious about yourself. And this is extremely important. I derive this from Stoicism, but which is my philosophy. And it's, Stoicism, I would say the way I look at it is very much implanted in the philosophy of adversity is your advantage. It's understanding that a lot of things coming at you, they're not necessarily okay, but worrying about what's outside your control, take an inventory of what's inside your control, and then focus all your effort on that in terms of moving forward. And that's just been so mission critical in terms of my ability to lead myself. It's actually provided, me a lot of comfort in the process. But additionally, kind of, diving in, you need to be able to, journal, assess what you're good at, what you really like, and what you're not good at. So for me, what I learned many years ago, I love people. I love connecting with people. People fire me up. I'm just genuinely curious, which is the second part of my framework, is you got to get curious. Now, on the flip side of the coin, if you were to ask me, Brian, to, break apart a computer or pop open an engine and try to fix, my car, I literally have not only no interest in that. Material things are engineered is not interesting to me at all, but the way people are engineered is fascinating to me. In fact, I was this is before COVID, a few years prior, and I'll never forget, I was at the local mall. My wife was shopping and she was getting some, and I was down at the kiosk, and some watch salesman came up to me and was trying to sell me a watch. But I was, started chatting with him, and I was just really interested. He was from Pakistan, this like really, really small town in Pakistan. And for me, it was fascinating. I'm like thinking to myself, how did this guy from this like small village in the middle of nowhere, Central Asia and Pakistan, wind up in Orange County, California at the Brea Mall selling watches? So I'm asking him a million questions about his life, about his journey. Finally, my wife comes over, and she's like, and this is before with all the challenges that we faced from immigration the last few years, but she turns to the guy. She's like, don't worry, my husband's not from immigration. He's just a genuinely curious guy. So for me, that was a big learning lesson for me that, if you want to lead yourself, not only do you have to seek adversity, but you need to be curious. Okay. What are you good at? What do you like? And what do you dislike? And once you have a better understanding of self, once you have self-awareness, you're way more, inclined to be not only a leader of others, but a leader of you. And the last part that I'll hit on, and I guess to finish this thought, would just be, and we just talked about this, embracing feedback. And from your perspective, growing up playing sports and soccer, feedback is just ingrained, and for me as well. And this is something at Fit Body Bootcamp, all of our coaches, from a new coaching onboarding playbook, which is a 12-week training module, one of the things that we do is we get them on game film every single week, kind of going back to the point, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And how you do that is you embrace feedback. So the third aspect and the pillar, if you will, of self-leadership is just get curious. Having a hard time doing this, in terms of asking and embracing feedback. This is the thought that came to my mind that really changed my mind frame on it. Whether you ask for the feedback or not, that other person already thinks that way no matter what. So wouldn't you want to actually know what they're thinking, know the areas that you need to get better? Because otherwise, at the end of the day, they're going to think the same thing, but you're not going to have the information to make an adjustment unless you embrace that feedback. So to kind of put a bow on it, Brian, aside from seeking adversity, which is the first foundation of self-leadership, get curious about you. Self-awareness is mission critical. The third is just embracing feedback.
Dude, I love that. As you're sharing it, I'm thinking this, Bryce, is like you talk about this, and I believe is, really leading yourself first. And I see people, and I know I struggle with this throughout my career, and it's still a little bit awkward at times of asking for that feedback, putting yourself in harm's way or adversity, as we might call it. And I can tell you just as recently with our team, I was asking for feedback, where our company is, where we want to go, how am I doing, what's the role that I need to play? And you may hear some things that you're like, is that good or bad? And my coach, I remember, gave me this advice. I would love your take. He's like, it's neither. Just set those aside. It's just feedback. And you get to decide what you do with that as you receive it. Because I think as athletes and people are like, well, it's good feedback because it's compliments. It's bad feedback because they're telling me things I'm not doing or I need to improve in. And when I started to look at this, and I'll just admit it's still hard, but I always reflect back on that, is it's just feedback. And I would rather have it, to your point, what you just shared, I don't want people to miss this, is if you don't ask for it and you don't get it, they're already thinking it anyway. Wouldn't you rather know how they really feel? And then you can perform and elevate your game. And so how do you deal with that? Like when you receive feedback and then you act upon it, do you have any philosophies or anything that you use to be able to receive it and then to go forward and attack it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible question. And your, I guess, coach and mentor talking about the neutrality of feedback. I mean, that is actually very, very accurate. It's neither good or bad. It just is. And it's interesting, the dichotomy of leadership. And I'm sure you're well studied on Jocko Willink. I think we've talked about this, extreme ownership and all that. His second book was The Dichotomy of Leadership. And there's not only a dichotomy in leadership, there's a dichotomy in everything. So also keep that in mind. If you receive feedback, don't actually take that as truth, but it's a piece of information you can take back, you can reflect, you can process, and then determine whether you want to act on that. And I think for me, having a feedback mindset is definitely in line with having a growth mindset. So I think you should be open to feedback and embracing it. Way easier said than done. And, to your point, I appreciate your vulnerability. I'm sitting here on my high horse, saying that, hey, you need to accept and embrace feedback to your audience, which is absolutely true. And I'd like to think I do that a lot, but there's sometimes that, we don't. This is just human nature. We don't hit all the time. So, to be, very clear and transparent there. But I think going back to the point, you also have to examine the source of the feedback. So many times, loved ones, people that have your best intentions, they might give you feedback. It might be accurate. It might be good feedback, but it actually might not be good feedback either. So you really have to understand that. And I look at it, I use this, I guess, the translator analogy. So if you and I, and I'm gonna make an assumption, you do not speak fluent Chinese. Would that be fair to say, Brian?
That's fair. Yeah.
So, okay. So at the end of the day, you're a guy that I've become friends with this past year. I look up to. You have this mindset, your leadership ability is really, really strong. But you would not be the guy if I'm in Beijing, China, that I'm calling for feedback or for coaching to navigate me through Beijing, to translate for me. And that's no disrespect to you. You wouldn't want to do the same thing because I don't speak Mandarin Chinese either. So I think you have to understand the source of the feedback. So if you're getting feedback, around money or finances, and you're getting feedback from someone that is not where you want to be, you want to accept the feedback, you want to process it, but ultimately you want to be very cautious. And I would say probably a good recommendation is not follow that feedback, because it's ultimately going to get you in a place that you don't want to be. On the other side of the coin, if you want to be a better leader, if you want to be a better speaker, and one of your coaches that you're connecting with or someone in your work is a great leader, is a great speaker, and provides you some feedback, that's probably a good telltale sign, not only to accept the feedback, but also process it and take action. So there's another element at play as well.
Love that. Man, that is gold. And these are things, Bryce, I don't want people to skip over these, because these are things I wish I knew 5-10 years ago, right? Because it used to be when I started to learn to accept feedback and receive it better and all of that, I remember going, man, I'm getting all this feedback now, right? Because we're asking for it and we're getting it. And you're like, now how do I filter it? And so I love what you said is check the source and going through those people closest to us, but maybe somebody that's accomplished what you have or you want to, and they've already done it. Man, what a great one as you go through. Yeah. Well, brother, I know we could talk and jam on a lot of things. I want to kind of hone in on this as we wrap. Is you're around people that you get to coach, help open businesses. I mean, you guys, the most successful franchise out there for fitness and these classes that you've put together and all that. I've got some friends that have some with you, which is pretty cool. And then you're coaching leaders over there. 2025 is an interesting year, right? Like talk about the election that's happened, and we talk about change that's happening. There's a lot of currents and things. What do you think great leaders today in 2025 that are leading teams today, those listening, where do they need to maybe think about that we haven't talked about yet, or they may not even be aware of leading their teams? What are some of the ways they can lead them better this year after they've led themselves? Now they're leading other people. Where should they be thinking?
Yeah, I think strong leadership is poised. It's cool, calm, and collected. And, very candidly, I'll speak open. I'm very excited about the change in leadership for our company, or for our country, what we're going to experience over the next few years. And I look at that because I just look at data over the last 8 years. So that's my personal belief. But whether I was extremely excited, which I am, or whether I was very, concerned, which, ultimately I'm not, but I very well could be if you're listening to this as well, depending on your thought behind it. At the end of the day, I learned this from a mentor, years ago. Things aren't as good as you think they are, and they're not as bad as you think they are either. And they're somewhere probably in the middle. So, being a leader that's cool, calm and collected, that's poised, but that also talks about the vision, all right, where we're going, being able to provide, good, strong communication, a path ahead. And then lastly, communication is a tenet of leadership. It's an ally of leadership. So what I've realized over the years is with a lack of communication, what happens? People make stories. They, jump to assumptions. Brian, if I sent you a text, hey, Brian, we need to talk, your first thought, would be like, oh shit, something's wrong, because we have a negativity bias as humans. That's actually what's kept us alive, throughout evolution. On the flip side of the coin, when you're able to communicate and over communicate, what happens is, from a leadership perspective, you're passing off that poise, you're passing off that cool, calm, and collected approach you have, because in the absence of information, people make stories. The opposite is true. With information, they're able to, process that, have more reassurance on the path ahead, reassurance on your direction as a leader. So that would probably be, some good guidance as we enter to 2025.
Beautiful answer. And I'll make this plug. So I've been actually leaning back into the communication side. I was listening to a good Ed Milet podcast this weekend, driving back from St. Louis, and Ed was talking about if he were to pick one skill of a leader today, and he can only just pick one, he went back into communication and that art of influence and persuasion, and really getting people to make decisions that were best for them, even when they may not see them. And so as you're sharing that, I'm just thinking to myself, man, that's it. And then a mentor of mine shared exactly what you just did. And Renee Rodriguez is the one, and said there's this narrative gap created when we don't fill in the story, and people tend to lean towards that negativity or fill in the gap in the story. And as leaders, I love that you landed it there, Bryce, because I can just tell the thought and the expertise and your experience in this field. And I hope people will go back and re-listen to this, because you dropped some gems in here. That to me is an area I'm focusing on personally, just raising my hand of how do I and our leadership team not allow these narrative gaps? How do we get better at communicating? How do we do these things together as a team? So, brother, you have brought some massive value. Before we wrap, I always love to ask this, is there anything that you're most excited about for 2025 in your own life that you're working on, or that's coming up in the future, so people can know what you're up to and what you're working on?
Ooh, well, I'm a business-focused guy, but I would say the most exciting things, and I'm sending some good prayers, but I want to be a father, so that's going to be the big focus from a personal perspective this year, and that's what I'm looking forward to most, in addition to doing the things, building teams and businesses, and just adding value to humanity. So that would be it for me, Brian.
Well, congratulations. So exciting, man. I can tell you, with 3 kids and all the things, all the journey, and one about to go to college, it's wild to think. I'm like, man, what is going on? You're gonna be a great dad and a great leader. And so thank you for pouring into our audience. And, I always say this is, it's a joy for me to get to sit and have these conversations. And it's why we started this, was we just get to pour this out, and people get to listen to conversations they normally wouldn't have exposure or access to, and they get to learn and improve their lives. And so everybody's got that decision today. As we close, my ask to you, and really challenge for those of you that are up for a challenge, and those competitors out there, is something today I know has resonated with you. Something Bryce has shared, and you go, you know what, that's me. I need to work on this habit or take that next step. And you heard his dad's story, and like you heard all these things here, like what he's been able to overcome in his own life and breaking those chains and everything there is like, where do you need to do that? Maybe you need to be the one that steps up in your family and be the chain breaker and the leader that leads yourself, and then you can go lead others. So Bryce, my friend, thank you as always. This is a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine, Brian. Kindred spirits. Thanks again for having me on.
Oh, this has been awesome. Well, guys, it's been another episode of Competitive Edge Podcast. As always, we would love for you to leave us a review. That's how we get the show out to more people. Share it with your friends. Share it with people you think would find value in this. And make sure, we're going to put Bryce's links in here. Make sure you connect up with him and you follow his journeys. He's got a lot of great content on his channel, and he's got some leadership frameworks that, if that really excited you today, we got a lot more. I can just tell you, he's got a lot more there that's going to help you on your journey. So make sure you take at least one action, share it with at least one friend, and go out there and do something great. Till then, guys, we'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.